Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate.
I'm Laura.
And this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking. We've been thinking lately, what with the world being what it is, that it might be the time for a themed episode on the books that make us laugh. It turns out, however, that none other than the folk at the New York Times had been thinking the same thing. Their article was themed around the snappy title, 22 of the funniest novels since Catch-22, the anti-war classic by Joseph Heller that was published in 1961.
No need for a podcast from us then, you might be thinking. And yet, reading the piece and listening to the pod with interest, we couldn't help but feel they had missed a few of our favourites. In short, we feel there's more to be said.
And so join us and friend and regular guest Phil Chafee as we throw a few more books into the mix that we hope will brighten your days and bring a smile to your face.
All that's coming up here on the Book Club Review.
And so we've got Laura dialing in from Vancouver. Phil is our New York correspondent while I'm here in London. Welcome both. I'm very excited to talk about this topic with you.
I'm very excited to be here. It's a fun one.
I was thinking we maybe need to formalise this slightly and I could designate you like Bureau of the Book Club Review podcast. You know, they do this
New York
monocle.
Bureau, the Vancouver Bureau.
I like being a correspondent, although we're not really corresponding per se.
Just before we start, I would love to know something you've been reading recently. Phil, how about you?
I'm in the middle of this book, Bangkok Wakes to Rain by Pezeshkzad. I'm sorry if I'm massacring that name. It's a Thai name, obviously. This is I'm not sure if he's Thai American, but a Thai writer who lives in Brooklyn, I think. This book came out a handful of years ago. It is really good. It's a sort of Cloud Atlas-y type book where every chapter is a different character and you loop back and slowly realize the connections, but they're across time, and also it's not just in Bangkok or Thailand, it's also across the Thai diaspora. So there's scenes in Japan and London and New York, and very different characters doing very different things. But as it links up, it starts out, each chapter is basically a short story, but then as it links up, I'm 50% of the way through, it's just more and more rewarding as you realize what's going on. So it's great.
I have never heard of that. How did you come to that? How
How does
find
Phil
that
do
book?
it? How does he do it, Kate? I'm just like, that sounds great.
Who put that on your radar?
This one in particular, I'm doing a big family trip to Thailand at the end of the year. So I've been seeking out Thai literature and history books about Thailand to read before going.
How about you, Laura?
I've finished up Going Infinite by Michael Lewis. Kate and I have talked about Michael Lewis a lot. This one is Michael Lewis's, what is it? It's nonfiction. It's not a memoir. It's jam. He's following around Sam Bankman-Fried before FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange that made him a billionaire, goes into bankruptcy and everything falls apart. Sam Bankman-Fried has now gone to jail for at least 25 years. I started it and found it a bit boring. Then I went back to it and I did really enjoy it. In some ways, it is a funny piece of work because Sam Bankman-Fried and his band of effective altruists were such peculiar characters. Certainly not villains, certainly not a Madoff character who's seemingly knowingly committing fraud. Towards the end, you're just like, I got to keep reading because this is really bizarre. Kate, you should get to it at some point. It's definitely not his best, though, because I think, and there's been some criticism of this, Michael Lewis was very sympathetic to Sam Bankman-Fried. And I would actually say problematically slighting, is that a word, to Bankman-Fried's CEO and ex-girlfriend. And he rushed it out, right? He rushed it out before the trial. So it doesn't really hang together. But it's a good read. It's like a weird, almost like Michael Lewis's finance nonfiction beach reads. Like, if you're in the mood for something different, but that's a bit light and takes you into the weird and wonderful world of finance, he's your guy.
I remember reading about it when it came out, and I was definitely interested. I think I was waiting for the paperback on that one.
What have you been reading?
I was on holiday last week and I was staying at this wonderful hotel right by the sea on the Dorset coast here in the south of England. And it had this wonderful book-lined room with lovely sofas and little tables. And you could go in there and people would bring you drinks. It was so nice. But mainly because, unlike a lot of hotel bookshelf situations where, you know, you always have a look, don't you? But it's not usually a very exciting range of choices. The brilliant thing about these bookshelves was that they had clearly been put together by someone who really knew their books. And there were some fantastic books on those shelves. New books that I was really interested in, some recent classics that I was happy to see again, and then some Middlemarch and things like that all there. Just the idea you'd sit down and curl up. I wasn't able to do that because I was on holiday with my children and there's no chance. But I did pull down, with this great feeling of happiness and familiarity, Miss Smiller's Feeling for Snow by, I think he's a Danish author whose name I've never known how to pronounce. It's Peter Hoeg, H-O with a strike through it, E-G. And I started reading it again and just all over again thought how much I love this book. It is such a good novel. Thrillers aren't usually a genre that I really like, but the main character in this, Smiller herself, is so interesting. And there is the murder that she's investigating, but there's also all this really interesting stuff, I think, about colonialism, the Greenlandic community in Denmark and how they are treated, and all this stuff about ice and snow and really understanding that, which Smiller does because of her background. It's such a great book. From memory, I feel like it falls apart a bit towards the end. The first 2/3 are just great, and I've been so happily dipping back into that again and being reminded all over again about how I felt the first time I read it many years ago. Listeners, Kate here. We're about to get to the books that make us laugh. But before we do, let me just take a quick moment to say, if you're enjoying the shows and want more from the Book Club Review Pod, you can join the Patreon, where for less than the price of a coffee a month, you'll get extras like my weekly email featuring reviews and recommendations. Want to know what Laura, Phil and I make of the bestseller list? You'll find that Patreon special episode, plus some others, for you to listen to when you subscribe. At the higher tier, you can also join the Podcast Book Club, held every month via Zoom. If you can't make the live discussion, you can catch up with the recordings anytime. There is an amazing community of readers there. I would love for you to join them. Maybe I'll see you there. Check the link in the show notes for all the details, or head to patreon.com/The Book Club Review. Right, on with the episode. All right, let's come on to that New York Times article. I loved the theme. When I saw that they'd done this, especially as it had been in my own mind's eye recently, I was like, great minds, New York Times. We clearly think alike. And I thought they'd done well to come up with an interesting range of parameters for it, and this idea of 22 books since Catch-22, helpfully, I think, giving them a bit of a cut-off point so that they could narrow it down. I loved everything about it. All I thought was they had taken the subject quite seriously in a way that surprised me. I think maybe they felt the pressure a bit, because I suppose if you say this is our definitive list of 22 books, inevitably you're going to be leaving out some people's favourites, and maybe they were a little bit nervous about that. But I like the way that they defended their choices, and I like the way that it felt like a slightly provocative list in lots of ways. Should I just read through them briefly and we can pass comment as we go?
Yes, I think so. I have comments.
I like the principle as well. I thought Catch-22. I don't know if either of you have ever read
I
it.
have not.
By Joseph Heller. It's a great book.
I don't know. What happens?
So it's a really good book. It's an anti-war book. It's about a squadron of men who are stationed in Italy during the war. And they're having this terrible time. But really, it's about the madness and crazy bureaucracy of war and just how insane war is in general. And if you're a thinking, feeling person and you're caught in the middle of this situation where you're forced to obey these orders, the main character you're starring, he just wants to get out. He doesn't want to be there. He's constantly trying to figure out ways of beating the system. And that's where the Catch-22 comes in, because every time he thinks he's come up with a reason he can be sent back, he's always thwarted. And he gets increasingly crazy trying to find his way out. And it's very rich in all these side characters. It's a parody of all these different types of people and all these different types of roles. I was chatting to someone about it today. I think one of the things I like about this subject is all these lovely... It's a great conversation to have with someone, to ask them what they think is their favourite funny book. And it brings up all these nice things. And I was chatting with someone today about Catch-22. They were saying they had reread it not so long ago and they had enjoyed it again and still thought, yes, it absolutely holds up. It's very funny. They said the only thing that troubled them was the way that women are portrayed in the book. And I thought, yes, actually, from memory, the women are basically all Italian prostitutes and depicted that way. They're just these sort of comic, farcical set piece props, exactly. And I was, actually, I can imagine if I was reading that now, I would also probably be troubled by that in a way that I wasn't when I read it when I was much, much younger.
I have checked the internet and it has informed me that I have not read it. I'm always confusing it with Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5.
Which I haven't read.
I'm feeling slightly better though, because the New Yorker wrote about those two novels in the same article around what they can tell us about war and now, etc.
I definitely feel very guilty for not having read it. And I also confused those two novels, Laura. I think they also came out, Catch-22 is about World War II, but it came out as did Slaughterhouse 5 in the Vietnam era. And I think the cultural resonance was because of that.
I'm just reading what they've written about it. Set during World War II and featuring Captain John Yossarian, the B-25 bombardier, the novel presaged in its black humour, its outraged intelligence, its blend of tragedy and farce, and its awareness of the corrupt values that got us into Vietnam. Not just Bob Dylan, but the counterculture writ large. Heller gave writers permission to be irreverent about the most serious stuff, the stuff of life and death. They then go into, I think in no particular order, and a lot of these are just completely unknown to me, so comment if you know anything about them. Scathing satire, The Whig by Charles Wright, 1966. I think this is interesting in that it feels like this is one that they feel isn't as well known as it should be. Charles Wright is not a name on many people's radar. His potent novels deserve a resurgence. He wrote 3 novels, each is about a young and sensitive black veteran of the Korean War who may or may not wish to become a writer and is trying to fold a foothold in New York City. All the worth reading, but the prize is The Whig. Then, one I have heard of, but I've not read, I like the little summary, Talky and Paranoid, Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth, 1969. No, silence all round.
I feel guilty. I know that one at least, but I've not read.
The Philip Roth novels I have read were not funny at all. I don't know which ones I've read, but I don't remember the big funny.
Yeah, I've read later Philip Roth too, and was not funny, but I feel like the early stuff is supposed to be very different.
The book is one long vivid monologue from a lust-ridden young New Jersey man named Alexander Portnoy, as delivered to his psychoanalyst, Dr. Spielvogel. It was the firecracker that augured a great career, and it still delivers a bang. Then there's one, again, I had never heard of, Earthy and Exasperated. It says, Oreo by Fran Ross, 1974. Ross's Oreo, her first and only novel, was published in 1974, year of my birth, and sank with barely a trace. Frustrated Ross abandoned fiction to write for Richard Pryor. It's time for the culture to catch up to Oreo. It's about a young woman, half black, half Jewish, on a quest to find her absent father, and the sexy humour flies freely from the first pages.
Sounds good.
So, yeah, interesting. Humane and Bittersweet, Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin. Is that how you say his name, or Maupin? 1978. Or Maupin? It's Maupin. I would pronounce that Maupin. Oh, just check your pronunciation before you launch into these things, Kate.
Well, it's talking whether you're French or American.
Yeah, exactly. He's American, presumably. A series of novels about San Francisco life beginning in 1978 with Tales of the City. You can dip into these warm, accessible, heavily peopled and sweet and sour novels almost anywhere.
I'm really enjoying, have you noticed the bottom of each of these descriptors? They have read if you like. And here it says, read if you like sourdough bread, reruns of Friends and Will and Grace, David Sedaris, the documentary, The Times of Harvey Milk.
Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls, 1982. Damp, tender and weird, they put. And I'm also laughing because one of the things I loved so much about this, which is not really something that works at all well on radio, but is that they've animated the graphics of the books. So they have these little comic things, and Mrs. Caliban has a sort of webbed hand coming out of it. Dorothy, a lonely housewife, falls in love with Larry, a giant sea creature who is open-minded and curious, eager to learn what he can about her and her world. Unlike Dorothy's inattentive, philandering husband, Larry can tell she's a marvel. There's read if you like the novels of Richard Yates, Daryl Hannah in Splash, Herpetology, Guillermo del Toro's film The Shape of Water. I've read about a third of Mrs. Caliban. I didn't get on with it that well, so I never finished it, but I had heard of it.
It was new to me. Actually, one thing I loved about this list was there was a whole bunch of stuff new to me,
Yes,
which is what I
me
want
too.
out of a list discovery.
Exactly. Yeah, and we'll come on to it. The comments are a fertile hunting ground for things that people obviously felt aggrieved have been left out, just like me. Cheery and laden with double entendre, The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4, by Sue Townsend, 1982. So this is the shout out to the British entry on the list. Not the only one, but it was very nice to see this here. This is an absolute classic. Certainly, when I was growing up, this is the book that everyone was reading. There was a TV series of it that was very... Back in the day when everyone just watched the same things, everybody watched The Diary of Adrian Mole. Just in case you don't know it, on the Penguin website, they've got a little quote. Friday, January the 2nd. I felt rotten today. It's my mother's fault for singing My Way at 2 o'clock in the morning at the top of the stairs. Just by luck to have a mother like her. There's a chance my parents could be alcoholics. Next year, I could be in a children's home. Meet Adrian Mole, a hapless teenager providing an unabashed, pimples and all glimpse into adolescent life as he writes candidly about the dog, his parents' marital troubles, and life as a tortured poet and misunderstood intellectual. Critic John Self writes the UK's best-selling fiction book of the 80s and one of the great comic creations of the past half-century. Impeccable comic timing, evergreen comic writing, I had more pure reading pleasure than from any other book I read this year. Now in its 40th anniversary edition, I see. It was very realist. It was just about his life and his feelings. Yeah, about his girlfriend.
Of emerging bodily functions.
Yeah, exactly. And being a teenage boy and all his angst and trying to define himself and figure out his place in the world and his slightly problematic family. And crucially, that they were not particularly well off. They were the struggling middle class, depicting that very particular slice of life that was very common to a lot of people. And so I think it really resonated quite widely.
Phil, did you read this one?
I had never even heard of it.
Really?
Completely not on my radar at all. I'm very curious about it because it says, read if you like Mike Leigh films.
Yes.
What's the similarity there?
It's that kitchen sink realism.
Okay.
I read it as a teenager. I did not find it funny. I remember lots of discussion of pimples.
He has pimples, wet dreams, a paper route, an elderly friend, and a huge crush on a classmate named Pandora. You see, even now, without even trying, I can remember the elderly friend, Bert, who is this man, this sort of befriending scheme where local youths are sent to befriend elderly people, and he gets stuck with this guy, Bert, who just loves these giant jars of pickled beetroot that he makes Adrian eat. But in the end, it's actually quite a sweet relationship. I think what I was thinking about, perhaps the larger question about what is it that we like in a book that we find funny, for me, often it's that there has to be the sense of heart and warmth, and these books are full of that. And of course, she's a very sharp social observer, and so all of that is bound up in there. So in some ways, they're quite political novels, which is also quite interesting about them.
Hey,
I can't believe you never heard of them, Phil.
We're on book 6 out of 22.
Yeah. I should definitely speed up. Some of them don't need a detailed description, right? So Heartburn by Nora Ephron, 1983. I feel like this is very well known. I was not surprised to find it on the list. Money, A Suicide Note by Martin Amis, 1984. Slightly controversial choice, I thought. Read if you like Othello, Dudley Moore and Arthur, the Patrick Melrose novels, Authorial Intrusion. The Mezzanine by Nicholson Baker, 1988. I once tried to read and I just felt utterly defeated by it. It's a very detailed stream of consciousness novel that I didn't find funny in any way, but maybe I just completely missed it because it says read if you like Seinfeld, which I love. Who doesn't like Seinfeld? Apparently I should have liked it. And then there's A Far Cry from Kensington, Muriel Spark. American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, 1991, Poker-Faced Overkill. So this was probably the most controversial choice. I'm looking at the cartoon as the little hand comes out with a business card and then it flips and it's a giant knife. Have either of you read it?
No.
No.
Although I have seen the movie, which is funny.
Yeah, I have read it. And actually I got it. I thought, yeah, it's very dark. And there is a scene in there so graphic about violence against women. I was truly horrified by it and I will never, ever forget it. And it falls into that category for me, whether is it okay for him to have written something that an unsuspecting reader is then going to be lightly traumatized by for the rest of their lives? I wasn't sure how I felt about that. But it is funny and it's very sharp. I thought it was a very interesting inclusion on the list. And then Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. So nice to see this on the list. This is the other British classic. Very funny, very well known, isn't it? Because of all those wonderful films that I thought actually were a fairly good adaptation. The Quick and the Dead by Joy Williams, 2000. Don't know that one. Then We Came to the End by Joshua Ferris, which is 2007. Dark Deadpan. I love this book.
I found it boring.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I thought
It's
it was
just them
so
like hanging out in their
clever.
emptying office.
I know, but the point of view is so great because it's written in this kind of
Yeah.
collective way, isn't it? What is that? Like the third person plural or something?
Second person plural.
We did this and then this happened and we thought this. And I thought that was so well handled. And way before The Office came along, that similar idea of behind the scenes in an office and all that kind of very nicely observed. And they work in some kind of advertising agency or something, don't they? So there are all these like appalling campaigns that they're all having to pull together on that I thought that satire on that was very good. I love that book. The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, 2007. That's a very good book. I wouldn't obviously put it on my list of funny books, but it's an excellent novel. I Am Not Sidney Poitier by Percival Everett, 2009. So that's interesting to see him on the list. Do you remember when we did the trees for the Booker? It was shortlisted. And one of the things we were very pleasantly surprised by was how funny it was. Like, it genuinely made us laugh.
I was going to bring it up.
Yeah, so it's nice to see another one by him on this list. Lightning Rods by Helen DeWitt, 2011, Willfully Perverse. I'm a big Helen DeWitt fan.
Mm-hmm.
And this made me think, oh yeah, I really should read this. Did DeWitt really go there? Oh yes, she did. Jo, her sad sack of a hero, lands on a business plan to help corporate America boost productivity and reduce sexual harassment in one fell swoop. Women employed as lightning rods will supply office workers with anonymous consensual sex on demand. A specially designed wall facilitates this innovation. Strong concept. And I feel like if anyone can handle that, she can. Fantastical World Weary, Pym by Matt Johnson, 2011. I had not heard of this one. Read if you like Antiquarian Manuscripts, Down Parker's MF Doom's Take Me to Your Leader, Little Debbie Snack Cakes, The Abominable Snowman. The Sellout by Paul Beattie, 2015, which we read because it won the Booker Prize, which is very good. It is quite funny. It says, this critic's favourite novel published this century. It's certainly the funniest. And then, I must be getting close to the end now, Private Citizens by Tony Tulathimuta, Sly Intelligence and Unerring Comic Timing. Read if you like Exhibitionism, Eavesdropping, David Foster Wallace, The Big Chill. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh, 2018. I think that's a very solid choice.
That's actually the only one of this entire list that I read, and I loved it.
I don't remember My Year of Rest and Relaxation being funny at all.
Oh, I left a lot.
We're going to get to this.
Her psychotherapist is one of the funniest characters in literature, I think. That whole thread was hilarious. Last but not least, Lake of Urine, A Love Story by Guillermo Stitch, 2020, profane and surreal. Fans of offbeat writers such as Flann O'Brien, Stella Gibbons, and J.P. Donlevy, and admirers of the off-colour puns in Finnegan's Wake, here is a book for you. Stitch's Lake of Urine is a strange, warty, high-flying satire about love, lust, and demented varieties of female empowerment. More specifically, it's about Urine and Norenbol Wakeling, sisters around whom young men lurk. I'm not sure I've ever read a book quite like this. Every character who wanders through it is, to use Primo Levi's words, as dishevelled and bristly as a cat returning from a rooftop jamboree. Dwight Garmer. Read if you like Mud, Emma Stone in Poor Things, Anecdotes about Pickles, Monty Python, the droll music of David Berman. That is their list.
It's not a great list. It's a garbage list.
Ooh, hot take.
Well, what I was going to say is it's a great list for discussion. It's a great list for provoking discussion.
It's a great list for discussion. The reason I'm saying it's a garbage list is because it's missing my funniest book, which has been published since Catch-22. She's not on here.
Well, shall we come on to that then? So who is missing?
Elif Batuman.
Where is Elif Batuman? Exactly.
She is effing hilarious.
So these are her... So far, there's The Idiot, isn't there? And then there's Either Or, which was the most recent one. And these are what we hope, I think, is going to be a 4-book sequence of novels detailing the life of this college student as she goes through studying at Stanford?
At Harvard.
Is it?
Harvard.
The reason I'm saying that is because I've been today revisiting The Possessed, which is the book of hers that I think I love the most, which is the first book that was published, which is a memoir. And that is very much her real life experiences studying at Stanford, studying Russian and going off on wild travels and adventures, and also writing about the crazy academic community that she's a part of when she's getting into this world of academia based around Russian language and culture. It's so funny. And then all of that wit and observation carries through to these campus novels. I think that's the best way to describe them.
And also, funny novels, funny memoirs, funny books. I think the thing about funniness, particularly when it comes to the written word, is it's so subjective and context-driven and mood-oriented. It's like there's almost too many variables that could impact whether or not you find the book funny, which is very different to, say, watching a television show or something else. I went through my copy of The Idiot. I have memories of laughing out loud. And I read this probably about 8-9 years ago now. It's a big book. It's about 400 pages. And I think I've read the first half in one afternoon. And helpfully, I have little blue stars next to things I found funny because I was remembering this passage about her getting a haircut. And I was like, what was that? What was funny about it? And I had put a little star next to it. There's nothing funny about it other than that you're in this young woman's mind. It's just, she's incredibly brilliant. Like Elif Batuman herself, and this character is an extension of her. She's so smart, but she's also only 18. So she's so stupid. And it's that high-low contrast that comes at you. It flips back and forth between incredible intellectualism and then the most mundane, slightly neurotic young woman thought that as a woman I recognize and can think back to who I was when I was 18. That makes you laugh out loud. But I don't know that everyone would have the same experience. Humor is very subjective, and so these novels, I think they're incredibly funny. They do seem to come up even on lists if you type into Google funniest novels. I feel like the New York Times, they missed a trick. She's funny. Her newsletter, she has a really good e-newsletter that's hilarious too.
I love those books, and they are the first thing that popped to mind when I was thinking modern books that have made me laugh. I have pushed them on so many people, including several people who liked them, but were like, I didn't think it was really funny. It is very subjective. I think they are so rich, those books, that you can really like them without laughing, which was not my experience, but it's possible.
The thing about funny books is I feel like anytime anyone ever says to you, this book is so funny, it made me laugh out loud, by default, you will not find it funny or laugh out loud. It's gotten ahead of the joke, so you can't come to it afresh.
So as not to have completely wasted my morning rereading The Possessed, I did pull out a little bit I wanted to read, which is when she goes off to Uzbekistan. She has to teach Russian, but there's some reason why she doesn't want to do that. She's worried that's going to be a problem. And then through some quirk of the system, she found out that if she could teach Uzbek, this solves the problem. But the problem is, of course, that she doesn't really know it that well. But the reason there's any possibility of her being able to teach Uzbek is because it's similar to Turkish, which is she's bilingual. It's her mother tongue. So she goes to Uzbekistan to have this deep immersive course in Uzbek. And she's assigned a tutor, Muzaffar, and she's talking about one of their lessons. Another day we learned about watermelons. Muzaffar taught me a folk expression. The watermelon fell out of its armchair. Can you guess what it means? He asked. I thought about it. A usurper will always eventually be deposed? What? It turned out that the Turkish word for armchair is the Uzbek word for armpit. So the expression actually meant the watermelon fell out from under his arm and was used to denote a great disillusionment. Muzaffar is walking back from the market, proud of his watermelon, Muzaffar explained. All of a sudden, something happens. He isn't proud anymore. In my family, he continued, moving from figurative to literal watermelons, Muzaffar is famous for always buying the worst watermelon. Send Muzaffar to the market, they say. He will bring us a big, round, beautiful melon, and eating it will be like chewing on some old, dry grass. Muzaffar's grandfather, by contrast, chose the best watermelons, which are often ugly in appearance, and which he identified by holding them up to his ear and listening to them talk. Muzaffar had tried listening to the watermelons talk, but he never heard anything. He had tried deliberately buying ugly melons, but then he just ended up with a melon that united a pale and tasteless interior with an ugly exterior. There's one little snippet. She's very funny. So, what else did they miss from their list? I feel like I've had way too much of my voice already. Let's have some more.
What were you going to add?
I was going to add this book, which is an early 70s novel from Iran called My Uncle Napoleon. Are either of you familiar with this?
No one's familiar
No,
with that.
I was going to say, yeah. It's very gracious of you to ask, but the award goes to Phil for the most obscure, funny novel.
So this is by Iraj Pezeshkzad, pardon my Persian. This is a very famous book in Iran. It's referenced by, I just read Martyr, that big novel of the year by this Iranian-American writer.
Kaveh Akbar.
He referenced that as one of the big influences. It's also in reading Lolita in Tehran, as our Nafisi talks about this. It came out in the early 70s before the revolution, and it is set in early 1940s occupied Iran when the Allies, the British and the Russians, occupied Iran to hold off the Germans. and to maintain supply lines to supply the Soviet Union. They came in and occupied Iran, and this novel is set in, I think, Tehran, in this big, crusty old dilapidated aristocratic compound with one large family, various nuclear families all connected, and it's dominated by this buffoonish uncle who they all call Uncle Napoleon because he's obsessed with Napoleon Bonaparte. The tone of the novel, it feels P.G. Wodehouse, but in Iran. It's all set from the perspective of the narrator, who is this 13-year-old boy and who opens the novel realizing that he's fallen in love with his cousin who lives in the compound and who is the daughter of Uncle Napoleon. He therefore spends the entire novel stressing out because all the families are constantly falling out for very baroque plotting reasons where they're all mad about very preposterous things, and various others come in. But the tone of the novel is, even when police are involved or this or that, it's very much like Jeeves and Wooster. The stakes are so low because it's just these family relations. It's just very funny. When I think of novels that make me consistently laugh, we all know that I will love Wodehouse. This one is basically just as good. I could read you a bit. So I'm going to read a quick passage just to give a sense of the tone. This is near the beginning. There's some event, I think it's some birthday party or something, and Uncle Napoleon is here, and I just want to set the scene. The other big character in this is Mash Qasim, who is the main sort of hanger-on sidekick to Uncle Napoleon. They both have convinced themselves that Uncle Napoleon was a great hero in these early 20th century wars, where actually there were these little he was not. There were these little scuffles, and he had a tiny bit of military service, but in their minds, they are delusional and they are constantly building up that experience. The regrettable event happened at about 10:30. Dear Uncle Colonel was showing off the new hunting rifle, which Asadollah Mirza, the official in the foreign ministry, had brought him from Baku. And he was going on and on about its good points and waiting for dear Uncle Napoleon to express his opinion. Dear Uncle picked it up a few times and held it this way and that and looked at it. The women at the party reminded him a few times not to play with guns, and he answered with a smile that he was an expert on the subject of munitions and knew what he was doing. While he had the rifle in his hand, little by little, he began to think of the brave battles of his past and started to recall his memories of them. Yes, I had a gun just like this. I remember, once in the thick of the Battle of Mamasani, one day, seeing the rifle in dear Uncle's hand, and perhaps guessing that there was going to be talk of the wars, Mash Qasim had stationed himself behind dear Uncle, and at this moment he interrupted the conversation and shouted, "Sir, it was the Battle of Kazarun." Dear Uncle threw an angry look at him. "Why are you talking rubbish? It was the Battle of Mamasani." "Why should I lie, sir? As far as I know, it was the Battle of Kazarun." At this moment, dear Uncle realized something everyone had realized, and this was that Mash Qasim had expressed an opinion in the name of the battle before he knew what dear Uncle was going to say, and that this reflected badly on the genuineness of whatever story he was going to tell. Quietly, but in a voice full of anger, he said, "My good man, I haven't yet said." "I don't know about that, sir, but it was the Battle of Kazarun." And he fell silent. Dear Uncle continued, "Yes, indeed. It was one day in the thick of the Battle of Mamasani. We were in the middle of a valley. On both sides of the heights had been taken by armed bandits." As dear Uncle went on with his story, he would sometimes rise up from his seat and then sink back down into it, and with the rifle under his arm, he made descriptive gestures with his left. "Just imagine a valley 3 or 4 times the size of this courtyard. Now I'm here with 40 or 50 infantrymen." In the midst of the guest's total silence, Mash Qasim again interrupted, "With your faithful servant, Qasim." "Yes, Qasim was what they now call my orderly." "Didn't I say, sir, that it was the Battle of Kazarun?" "I said, don't talk rubbish. It was the Battle of Mamasani. You're getting old, your memory's gone, you're gaga." "Sir, I never said a word." "Fine, shut up and it'll be even better." "Yes, indeed, there I was with 40 or 50 infantrymen. Now those infantrymen were in a wretched state. As Napoleon has said, a commander with 50 well-fed soldiers can do much more than with 1,000 hungry soldiers. And then all at once a hail of bullets started. The first thing I did was throw myself down from my horse. This Qasim here, with another fellow that was there, was next to me, and I grabbed hold of him with my hand and pulled him down from his horse." Once again, Mash Qasim interrupted. "It was me and none other, sir." Shyly and fearfully, he added, "Not to be pushy-like, sir, but I'm once again to state it was the Battle of Pazaroon. Perhaps for the first time in his life, dear uncle regretted having allowed mashed possum into the arena of his battles. Hell and damnation, whatever it was. Now will you let me speak? Sir, I'm completely dumb. I don't know a thing." Anyway, it obviously is not going to be to everyone's taste, but I found this absolutely delightful. And it also, unlike Woodhouse or James of Worcester, there is also a coming of age story attached to this, which does add some heart to the preposterous relatives battling in the courtyard.
Yeah, that's what a find. Laura, can you top that?
No, because listeners, I gave Kate advance warning. Other than Elif Batuman, where I have a very vivid memory of laughing out loud, I don't know if there's that many funny novels out there. Coming back to the subjectivity business. And I've been going through Google and searching funny books and reading articles. And I've read many of these books. And I'm like, was it funny? I don't remember it being funny. I've read Queenie by Candace Carty-Williams, which was Bridget Jones for the 21st century. I remember it being dark and having some really problematic sex. Don't remember it being funny. Dolly Alderton. What was her memoir called? Everything I Know About Love. I remember enjoying it, don't remember laughing, and don't remember any of the plot. Less? Do you remember Less, which was nominated for the Booker?
Yes, that's an interesting one to throw into the mix.
It pops up on lots of lists.
Yeah.
Don't remember it being funny.
It is funny, but it's not laugh out loud funny.
Amusing.
Yes.
But listeners are like, why, Kate, did you let Laura even come on this pod then? I do have one. I do have a book to offer that I did think was funny, and I'm not sure that you, Kate, did, which is Where'd You Go, Bernadette by
Maria Semple.
Maria Semple, which is a very clever novel. It is a novel of sorts.
It's an epistolary novel.
It's an epistolary novel, so it's letters and emails and memos all pulled together. And it's the story of a young child, I think she's about 8 to 10, a precocious child trying to track down her architect mother, who's left her career behind in California at some point when they've moved to Seattle because her husband's in the tech world. And she hates Seattle, she hates the rain, she hates her life, and she's gone missing. We don't know where. And this all sounds quite dark, but the tone is very witty and very dry. And there is a passage, I don't know if it made me laugh out loud, but it was so spot on that even now when I read it, it makes me smile. So I can offer that up to, I should say, non-Canadians. You may not find this funny, or if you have spent any time in Canada, you may nod in recognition. One of the conceits is that Bernadette has taken on a digital PA. Would that be the right word? So
yes,
it's
a virtual assistant, isn't it?
A virtual assistant.
Which now I think are much more common, but at the time this was, I remember when we read it first of all, this was quite a radical idea that you could have, it's someone based in India who's doing everything for her remotely.
So she writes many emails to Manjula Kapoor, and this one begins, "Oh, could you make dinner reservations for us on Thanksgiving? You can call up the Washington Athletic Club and get us something for 7 p.m. for 3. I recognize it's slightly odd to ask you to call from India to make a reservation for a place I can see out my window, but here's the thing. There's always this one guy who answers the phone. Washington Athletic Club, how may I direct your call?" And he always says it in this friendly, flat, Canadian way. One of the main reasons I don't like leaving the house is because I might find myself face to face with a Canadian. Seattle's crawling with them. You probably think US, Canada, they're interchangeable because they're both filled with English-speaking, morbidly obese white people. Manjula, you couldn't be more mistaken. Americans are pushy, obnoxious, neurotic, crass, anything and everything. The full catastrophe, as our friend Zorba might say. Canadians are none of that. The way you might fear a cow sitting down in the middle of the street during rush hour. That's how I fear Canadians. To Canadians, everyone is equal. Joni Mitchell is interchangeable with a secretary at open mic night. Frank Gehry is no greater than a hack pumping out McMansions on AutoCAD. John Candy is no funnier than Uncle Lou when he gets a couple of beers in him. No wonder the only Canadians anyone's ever heard of are the ones who have gotten the hell out. Anyone with talent who stayed would be flattened under an avalanche of equality. The thing Canadians don't understand is that some people are extraordinary and should be treated as such. Yes, I'm done. If the whack can't take us, which may be the case because Thanksgiving is only 2 days away, you can find someplace else on the magical internet.
I was thinking, it's very good, isn't it, when sometimes someone is able to say something that you are aware of and they're able to put it into words, almost like saying the unsayable. Sometimes there can be a deliciousness that's very enjoyable.
And Canadians, don't hate on me. I actually think Canada has changed a lot since I left and came back. There's just so many new people from different backgrounds and cultures, and that shakes up this stereotype a little bit. Nonetheless, there's a lot of democratic and consensus-driven decision-making that I find a bit tedious at work sometimes, because I'm like, which one's best? It's clear something is best. Like, someone is better than someone else, and something is better than that. Like, it can't be objective.
I've read that novel more than once, and yeah, I remember it's funny. I think I felt a bit critical of it, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the second time I read it, where actually then I was just able to kick back and enjoy everything that was funny about it.
It's quite snide. I think that's, I wouldn't say I only like snide funny fiction, because I don't think that's what Elif Batuman is, but it can be amusing.
I was thinking as well, you need to be surprised a bit. And in order for that to happen, I've been thinking about this recently. I always love when books are cleverer than I am, which is not saying much at all, but it's always so great if it's someone who I could tell could outthink me in a second. Elif Batuman is an obvious candidate for that. Maria Semple, same. I've got a slightly eccentric choice, but it's a book I love very much. And it's one that I give to people sometimes when I think they need cheering up. It's called The Ascent of Doodle by an author called W.E. Bowman. Have either of you ever heard of this one?
Yeah.
I've heard you mention it, and it did appeal.
An outrageously funny spoof about the ascent of a 40,500-foot peak. A laugh-out-loud cult favourite. Led by the reliably under-insightful Binder, a team of 7 British men, including Dr. Prone, constantly ill, Jungle, the route finder, constantly lost, Constant, the diplomat, constantly arguing, and 3,000 Yogastani porters, set out to conquer the highest peak in the Himalayas. It's a parody of a vogue for these slightly pompous British expedition memoirs that were very fashionable, apparently, between the 1930s and the 50s. And there was one in particular, 1937 account of the Nanda Devi expedition by Bill Tillman. That was particularly the book that inspired W. Bowman. He was actually an engineer. That was his career. But he also liked to write. On the Penguin website, it says, W.E. Bowman, 1912 to 1985, was a civil engineer who spent his free time hill walking, painting and writing, brackets unpublished, close brackets, books on the theory of relativity. And it was published in 1956, and I think it did okay, but after some years, it fell out of print. But what Bowman didn't know was that there was one group of people who really loved this book, and that was climbers and sort of mountain people and sort of outdoorsy types. And they didn't just love it, they really loved it. And so gradually, by word of mouth, it began to attain the status of a cult classic. And all these funny things happened. If you look on Wikipedia, it says a small mountain in the Masson Range in Antarctica, near Mawson Station, bears the official name Doodle Peak, inspired by the book. A mountainous point in Aoraki, Mount Cook National Park in New Zealand, is known as Doodle. The northeast ridge of Pikes Peak in Colorado, United States, has been unofficially nicknamed Doodle Ridge by local climbers. There is a hidden couloir in the Vanoise National Park in the French Alps, also unofficially known as the Doodle, and named by one of the first to discover it and ski down it, Will Eaton. It is so called as it took a long time to find the entrance, and skiing down it wasn't without complications. And a lot of these details you find out if you get the vintage edition of it. You get this wonderful introduction by Bill Bryson, who is also a writer who immediately springs to mind when anyone's thinking about funny books. He writes, "Years ago, before my hair began to leave my head and take up a more sheltered existence in my ears and nostrils, I passed my afternoons and early evenings as a sub-editor on the business section of The Times. It was clean work, and the perks included subsidised canteen meals, whose principal virtue was that they seemed not to interfere with normal metabolic activity, the right to claim a small monthly cash payment for expenses that were entirely fictitious, though scrupulously and imaginatively recorded on a lengthy docket, and the chance, 2 or 3 times a year, to help Philip Howard relocate his desk by buying some of the many thousands of books that had been submitted to his department for review in the previous few months, but had failed to make the cut. Often because they were very bad and of no interest to anyone. These Mr. Howard sold to a grateful staff at knockdown prices and pass the proceeds on to charity. Since these sales were generally held between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., an hour when most of the reporting staff were still only partway through lunch, they were effectively private affairs for the sub-editors. It's not often you see a newspaper sub-editor galvanised, or indeed in motion, but the announcement of a book sale always had an electrifying effect on the sub's room. In a little over an instant, 60 or more inky-fingered drudges would be thronging Mr. Howard's modest sanctum, picking through piles of mostly useless books, with an intensity that threatened, at times, to become unseemly. It was on one such occasion, as I stood grappling with a thin and obstinate lady from the foreign desk over an anecdotal history of Japanese naval codes or some such thing, that my eye fell on a slender paperback bearing a pen and ink sketch of a mountain adventurer lying prone in the snow. The title was The Ascent of Doodle. Sensing a find, I loosed my hold on the lady's bun and claimed the book. Later that evening, in the canteen, while dining on Lancashire trotters or some other mysterious dish of old England, I cracked open the book and within moments knew that I had found something special. He read the whole thing, he absolutely loved it, and then I think was instrumental in helping bring it back to attention, and since then it's become much better known. It is a total delight from start to finish, and I did just want to read a little bit of it to give you a sense of it. The main expedition leader is a man called Binder. It's his memoir of this expedition. So this is when members of the expedition are on the boat, heading to the rankling Lahr. The voyage was uneventful. My responsibilities as leader prevented me from spending as much time as I should have liked with the others, but I was gratified to see that the esprit de corps, which is so important on expeditions such as ours, was uniting our party into a closely knit community. The importance of team spirit cannot be overestimated. As Totter once said, when you are swinging helplessly at the end of a 100-foot rope, it is important to know that the man at the other end is a friend. It was this spirit, more than any other single factor, which brought success, and I was happy to see it growing during the voyage. Humour was not lacking. Wish caused much amusement by turning up for dinner one evening with a black eye, which he had sustained by walking into a davit, while on the same occasion Burley exhibited a bandaged hand, injured during a game of deck tennis. Burley was down most of the voyage with sea lassitude, and it was a surprise to me that he had the energy for tennis. The others kept fit, except for Prone, who alone succumbed to seasickness. Wish was kept busy with his apparatus. He tested our boiling point thermometers and was able, by averaging the results of many readings, to fix the ship's height as 153 feet above sea level. Burley said this was nonsense, but Wish pointed out that due to the Earth's not being a perfect sphere, but larger at the equator than at the poles, the result was quite in accordance with known facts. Shute took many reels of film, but by an unfortunate oversight he exposed them to daylight, so that no record exists of this portion of the journey. Constant, to his great delight, discovered a Yogastani family on the lower deck, and spent much time with them improving his knowledge of the language. The association came to a sudden end, however, in a rather strange way. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Constant came running up the stairway in a state of terror, closely followed by a small but powerful Oriental person who was waving a knife. After being rescued, Constant explained that he had made a trifling error in pronunciation. He had wished to express admiration for the poetry of Yogastan. Unfortunately, the Yogastani word for poetry is identical with the word for wife, except for a sort of gurgle at the end. Being unable, in the enthusiasm of the moment, to produce this gurgle, he had deeply offended his host, with the result that we had witnessed. Constant kept to his own deck for the rest of the voyage. And so there is your cast of characters. They are all, in different ways, absolutely terrible at the things that they have been selected to do. The map reader constantly gets them lost. The radio inspector can't work the comms. The doctor is constantly ill. But the thing that makes it work is that this main character, Binder, has this sort of blind optimism and faith, and every situation he reads in this kind of like relentlessly positive way. And so what you get is this very hearty account of what he's observed and his experience of climbing this mountain. And what you're witnessing, reading between the lines, like everything is between the lines of what's actually going on. I think the brilliance of it is the way that it's so well sustained throughout the whole book. It's not long, but it never gets tiresome. He never drops the ball. It always hangs together. And the reason I love it is because actually it's a silly book, but there is something in it about these challenges and the things that human beings can endure and overcome even in this sort of parodic form, nonetheless, that's there. And at the end, it's actually genuinely quite heartwarming, quite touching the way it finishes, which is why I love it so much. I think it's a great book. It's very funny. It actually genuinely does have some laugh out loud moments for me. I've read it more than once. And as I say, it's a book that I love to bestow on people. So that's my recommendation. Have we got time for another one, or do you think we better wrap it up?
I mean, I can go really quickly. I think these are not novels, but one, if I'm just desperate for knowing I'm just going to laugh, comedians' books can be very good. So Trevor Noah's memoir is great. Ali Wong's memoir I read, Tina Fey. They might not be the best books ever, but there's often just guaranteed to have some really good jokes in there.
Yeah, I agree. That's almost another list, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Of non-fiction memoirs.
Yeah.
That would be...
And memoirs in general they can be very dark, but they also often are just very funny.
Maybe we'll pick that up ourselves. No need to wait for the New York Times.
One thing I was going to say is that humor dates really quickly. Yeah. And when we're talking about memoir, the memoirs that Phil just mentioned, they're all quite contemporary, right? We still find them funny. I should have mentioned this earlier, but Kate, I don't know if you remember, I think you wanted to do a funny podcast or write an article for the website around funny books 4 or 5 years ago. And so I read Three Men in a Boat, which is always held up as this quintessential, hilarious British novel.
Well, be careful, because I think Phil has pitched that.
Absolutely.
On the pod.
It's very funny, which book. I don't think you're about to say.
Did you think it was funny?
Absolutely.
I didn't find it that funny.
I'm with Laura. I tried so hard to laugh. I could laugh about it now.
Evelyn Waugh always comes up as a name of a funny writer. I like Evelyn Waugh, but I don't really find his books funny. And I just think you miss the contemporaneous knowledge that would actually let you get the joke.
I am going to push back, Laura. I think before I realized the time frame, Scoop immediately jumped to mind as something that has made me laugh out loud a lot. I also recently, for a different book group, read Vanity Fair, Thackeray, and was laughing constantly. It was really, I had never realized that it was just so preposterous and fun. Obviously, some jokes fall away, but I do think there is a lot of humor that can be gotten from very old things.
I think we should set ourselves a challenge to seek out so-called funny books over the next few months and report back in. Or at least I'll set myself that challenge. One, because it seems like I'll get to read a lot of light, easy fiction, whether or not I laugh out loud.
It's such a rich subject. I feel like actually you could have just a whole podcast just dedicated to this one theme in the reading world. But yeah, no, I love the idea of that. That's 2 potential future shows I've got out of this already. I'm very happy. A mission for me, I was surprised didn't get a mention, was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is something that came up quite a lot in the comments, which I reread recently with my eldest daughter, who's now 12, and I was delighted at how well that holds up. It's very smart, it's very funny, it's a good story, you care about the characters, it's funny. And the other novel I was going to flag up, I'm hesitating slightly because, it's not laugh out loud funny, but I think it's a deeply funny book, and that's The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald. So I reread that not so long ago. I had read it originally and I didn't find it particularly funny. In fact, I thought it was quite a melancholy book, because it is. It's a sort of sad story about a woman who wants to open a bookshop in this obscure Suffolk town where she lives by the sea. And the townspeople don't really want a bookshop. And so she's ultimately has this big struggle to do this thing that no one really wants her to do. And I think Fitzgerald's very good about these characters who are a little bit defeated by life or things in life. I identify with that. But rereading it more recently, I was so surprised and pleased by how funny it is. It's so observationally brilliant. These devastating little ways of capturing people and situations. A lot of it is drawn from her own life because she lived there and had some sense of this small town world that she's critiquing in lots of ways. And yeah, it's a very funny book. And I was thinking also about her other book, The Blue Flower, which is a masterpiece. It's such an incredible book, but that's also very funny.
One thing this reminds me of is one book I had been considering was Lincoln in the Bardo, the George Saunders book, which I think perhaps like Penelope Fitzgerald, obviously that is a book about death and grief, but there is this flip side to pathos of humor, which Saunders is really good at pulling out. And I think that is also present in some of Saunders' short stories. Dark subject, but yet there's lots of humor there. I have not read The Bookshop, but that has me very curious to read it.
I couldn't remember a moment in Wolf Hall where I laughed out loud, but I have this suspicion that Hilary Mantel has made me laugh out loud.
Yes.
Because perhaps in a similar way to what you're describing, Kate, where there's just these, life is funny sometimes. And she is such a master at writing real life and real people that you feel like you're there. And I'm convinced she has made me laugh out loud.
Hopefully listeners to this are in a similar way to us when we first looked at that New York Times list. Hopefully listeners are thinking, oh, but you haven't talked about this or this. Or, oh my God, I can't believe they didn't talk about this. So if that's you, do let us know. Drop us a line in any of the various ways to contact us that I'll put in the show notes. We would love to hear from you. And yeah, I'm very happy that I feel like this is a subject we're going to come back to. There's more to be said.
I am intrigued to seek out Phil's obscure, humorous novels.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get that one back on the old bestseller list. That's nearly it for this episode. You'll find all the books mentioned in the show notes, and I'll link to the New York Times article should you want to read it. This episode was edited and produced here in London by me, Kate Slaughterhouse. Head to our website, thebookclubreview.co.uk, for full show notes and an episode transcript. Plus, you'll find our archive of over 150 episodes. Try one from the backlist. I think they're all good. If you want to keep up with the pod between shows, you'll find me on Instagram and Threads at Book Club Review Podcast. And don't forget you can support the show by joining us on Patreon, where you'll get lots of things in return, including the opportunity to join the Podcast Book Club. This month we're reading Anna Funder's book Wifedom, which casts light on the neglected first wife of George Orwell, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, and offers a tribute to the unsung work of women everywhere. Follow the link in the show notes or head to patreon.com/The Book Club Review for all the details, including the programme of book club reads for the rest of the year. If you're feeling kind, as my grandmother used to say, please do leave a quick star rating and review of the show via your podcast app. These really help new listeners discover the pod, plus I love to read them when I find them. Next up for us, Laura, Phil and I are swapping book recommendations as we go through our recent reading piles, including The Ministry of Time by Callie-Anne Bradley, Cahokia Jazz by Francis Spofford, and Art World Exposé All That Glitters by Orlando Whitfield. That episode is coming soon. But for now, thanks for listening and happy book clubbing.